Look, I'm just saying your Frodo was really Saruman all along theory just doesn't hold up. I know they were never in the same room, but the height differences alone. Hello there. Welcome to Plugin Along, a stream dedicated to LOTRO plugins. Last time, we covered a lot of the basics of LOTRO plugins. Things like what are plugins, where can we find them, how do we install them, and how do we load and unload them. And we also looked at the bare minimum for making a plugin, the .plugin file and a .lua file. Today we're going to look at the basics of how to read and write Lua code and the building blocks of graphical user interfaces, or GUIs, things like windows, buttons, and labels. I have a rough outline of topics I'd like to cover today, but please feel free to jump into chat with your thoughts and questions. All right, I've got to move a few windows around here, so hang on a moment. I should probably not cover up my chat window, because then when people are like, hey, there's chat. All right. Cool. Okay. So I wanted to talk about a few useful references when you are doing plugin development. The first one, and let me see if I can share this screen here. Neat. Okay. It's not actually that one, it's going to be this one. Awesome. So, when we're writing LOTRO plugins, we're writing in a language called Lua. Now, Lua doesn't stand for anything. It means moon in Portuguese, I think. So it's not an acronym or anything. But this is the standard reference at lua.org for how the language works. Now, LOTRO uses a version of Lua 5.1, but the current version of Lua is 5.4. So that does sort of ask the question, how do we know which version of Lua LOTRO is using under the covers? Well, that's actually pretty easy to do. Let's pull up our main.lua plugin file here and ask it to do some stuff. Now, last time we had done a basic hello world writing, but we can do something very similar if we just ask it to print out the current version of Lua. So for instance, we can go to turbine.show.writeLine, and we can ask it, we can say, Lua version, and then concatenate on the current version. Well, what does that look like? Plugins manager. We can see that Hello World is not loaded right now. If we load it, we can see, my apologies, I've covered up that side of the screen. Well, that just won't do. Excellent, much better. Okay, so we could see in the plugin manager, Hello World wasn't loaded. We can go ahead and load it. And those two lines of text, Hello World and Lua version, we can see those being printed out as the plugin is run. And we can see that LOTRO uses Lua version 5.1. Now, it actually uses a scaled down version of Lua 5.1. There are things you could normally do in Lua that you can't do in LOTRO plugins for security reasons. So, communicating without the outside world, reading arbitrary files on your computer, these are things you can't do, but you could do normally with Lua. So, 5.1 technically, but less than that. But if there's any new features that have come out in Lua 5.2, 5.3, 5.4, those are definitely not available. This is using an older version, and a smaller version at that. Oh, let's see. Oh, thank you, Little Redhead, for sharing a list of awesome plugins. If anyone has any questions about existing plugins as well, feel free to shout them out into chat. Today I'm going to focus on what it takes to make your own plugin, but if you want to talk about existing ones or have questions about those, we can always derail for fun plugin chat. Okay, so the Lua 5.1 reference manual that you can see over there, you can find that at lua.org. That's going to be your guide to how the Lua language itself works. Now, if you're new to programming, don't worry. I'm going to be explaining what's happening on the screen. But if you are a programmer, or if you have a history with programming and you're just new to Lua, that's where you would go to find out, okay, what can I do with this language compared to the ones that I'm used to. If you are used to programming in languages like C++ or C Sharp, you might find that Lua is a lot more flexible in how you can write something than you are used to. For instance, if I were to go ahead and type some new code here, something that I'm very used to coming from the C Sharp world is writing a conditional statement in a certain way. So let's say we have a few variables here. Local b equals 10, and if a equals b, then do something. Turbine.shell.writeLine a was equal to b. Great. End. That's fine. That's completely okay. In fact, if we go ahead and unload and reload that, we can see in our... Oh, haha, I forgot to do something if they're not equal, which they're not. We'll go ahead and write out that they were not equals. Excellent. And we can see right there, we got some output. Oh, there's a chat. Yes, plugins, someone in the chat says, are we using a particular programming language? Plugins in LOTRO use the programming language Lua. And you can see a link to the Lua website there on the left side of the screen. All plugins are written in Lua. And the first thing LOTRO does is it tries to load a file that you put into your .plugin file, and it assumes that's a Lua file, tries to load it as a Lua file, and if there are any syntax errors, and we'll talk about that in a bit, if it has any problems loading the file, then it says nope, and does not load the rest of your plugin. So everything must be valid Lua script programming files. Cool, thank you. So this is a way... Oh, yes, yes, excellent. You didn't realize that was the language. That is the language we're going to be writing in. It looks very similar to other languages, and so if you are a programmer used to languages like C++, C Sharp, this is going to make sense. So, like I said, this is what I'm used to writing as a C++, C Sharp, that's my background. But Lua is pretty relaxed in how you write things. You don't need to end your lines with a semicolon. So we could just get rid of those. You don't need to surround these with parentheses like that. You don't need to surround these function calls with parentheses like that. Oops, you do need those quotes though. So we could transform this a little bit. Go ahead and unload that plugin, reload that plugin, and we can see everything was fine. Lua had no problem with it being written like that. So you can write it either way. I highly recommend you pick a style that works for you and stick with it though, because if you just switch back and forth to very relaxed to very specific, when you come back to your files a month from now, a year from now, or if someone else looks at them, it's going to be a lot harder for them to figure out what's going on. Consistency is much more important than which specific style you settle on. All right, we have someone saying, please make this a video available as a VOD, video on demand. Yes, this will be going up on the Life Beyond the Shire YouTube channel, and there'll be an accompanying blog post up on the Life Beyond the Shire website as well, which will have some still images and probably a little bit better text because I wrote it out ahead of time. Let's see, Shopom uses Unix and Cisco at work. Neat. Yes. So if you use shell scripting, then the Lua language is going to feel kind of similar to that too. Excellent. Okay. So that is just a little bit about Lua. If you're not familiar with programming at all, then some of this might be a little weird. But this is just saying, hey, we have a thing, we're going to call it A, we're going to put the number 5 in there. We have a thing, we're going to call it B, we're going to put the number 10 in there. And then we're going to compare the values and do something based on that. If they're equal, we're going to do this thing. If they weren't equal, we're going to do this thing. So even if you aren't familiar with programming languages in general, hopefully that makes a certain amount of sense. But I'm going to be annotating some of the code that I wrote here right here with comments. If you're not familiar with comments, they're a way to make notes for humans, not necessarily the computer. In Lua, a comment starts with double dash, and then you type whatever you want. This is a comment. B holds the value 10. So you can see my editor here is color coding things a little bit. Hopefully you can see that on the screen. And that gray color is just saying, yeah, that's not actual code there. That's just a comment. Let's see. Oh, people in chat are talking about how videos on LOTRO stream just get archived automatically, which is super awesome. And you can go back way back into the past and look at videos and see how things have changed. Okay, so that's a little bit about Lua itself. Now, how do we work between Lua and LOTRO? Well, the next thing I want to show is the official Lua documentation. And let me pull that link up on this browser here. Excellent. So where you get the official documentation, well, that window is not very big, is it? Just a moment. Awesome. On the LOTRO interface page for official update 25 Lua documentation, and these updates come out occasionally, depending on if things are changing behind the scenes. Update 25, I believe, introduced stout axes, and so if you wanted to have your plugin know about stout axes, you needed to they needed to make a change in Lua, so the documentation got updated as well. If you go ahead and download this, you get a zip file, and within that zip file, you get a bundle of HTML web pages. Open up index.html, and you get this page. And I'm going to refer back to this page several times during this stream, but this is kind of the core reference that I use when I'm trying to figure out how to do something within LOTRO's plugin framework. Okay, looking in chat. Excellent, thank you, Moobot. You're doing a great job. Okay, so this is the plugin documentation. And for instance, if I wanted to know more about that write line command that I've been using, I would go into the turbine shell listing of functions that you can do, the methods here, and I would look at write line. Well, what does this say? It says my window's not wide enough. There we go. It says the function is shell.writeLine, and that you pass it some text, and that text gets marked as standard output. And we can see it's going into the standard tab here. This gets a few other things as well, but this is basically where I go for my standard output right there. Excellent. So we know how to write things to the standard output. Great. We're probably going to do that a fair amount. Neat. So the last thing I want to pull up, if you haven't discovered it already, is there is a great thread on the LOTRO forums, which is full of a bunch of really nice people who are there answering questions on their own time. They're just fans like I am. But this thread created by Garen called "Writing LOTRO Lua Plugins for Noobs." I highly recommend it. It's kind of like a textual version of what I'm trying to do here on the stream, introducing both programming and plugins to a general audience. So it's amazing. I highly recommend just glancing through it. It is, of course, a little older. He started, I'm sorry, I don't actually know the gender. They started writing it back in a few years ago. Last I did 2015. Not much has necessarily changed, obviously, stout axis, but how to write a plugin hasn't really changed. So this is really valuable information. Oh, and we have a question in chat. Am I correct that you cannot suppress an output via Lua, and you cannot send data to different channel than standard? That is an excellent question. To my knowledge, you can only observe messages going to chat channels, and you can determine which channel they were going to. And we can take a look at that in a little bit if you want. But I don't think you can stop those messages from happening. For instance, there's a fantastic plugin called Waypoint that uses the /LOC output. like this, and it parses through the information here to figure out where you are and in relation to the thing that you've told it to target. So it can tell you your bearing and your distance. And it's a little chat spammy because it requires you to refresh that every so often, click, click, because its information times, gets stale. It can't query that information without you doing /loc. So you do /loc, you do /loc, and you can see this makes your standard chat channel a bit overwhelming. And that's actually the first reason why my standard chat channel is different from my general channel, which is hidden under my face there. And so I have a feeling if it was possible to kind of squelch that output, that they would have had that as an option for Waypoint. So that would be my first instinct, because no one else seems to do it. It's probably not possible. But that is a point where I would go into the references here. Sorry, I've skipped around a little bit. And come into chat and see what is possible. So we can see the interaction with chat is that you get to see when a message comes in. So you can see what type of it is and what the message was itself. So unlike in some other programming languages where there might be a reject value that you can say, nope, we're processing it, don't send it on, that doesn't seem to be the case. We're just a passive observer of chat. Yes, for Andreas does point out you can create your own window that you use instead of the chat and filter it there. Let's see. And yes, the Waypoint, as Solarian says, Waypoint programmer, fantastic. Thank you so much for putting that into LOTRO World. I use it all the time, especially for treasure caches. Oops, we don't need that. Okay, so one of the things that you might be seeing is when I want to load and unload a plugin, I've just been using the unload all and the load buttons, which works just fine. When you start developing plugins while also using plugins, though, it's kind of annoying to unload all because then you have to go and load each one at a time. There is a command line variation on the unload that lets you unload just some of the plugins, though. Now, last time, I mentioned the .plugin file has this configuration apartment value. This is a value that is useful if you need to segment yourself off from the rest of the plugins and allows you to be unloaded by specifying this apartment name in the plugin unload command. So I can say /plugins unload plugin along, and that will unload everything in that apartment. So if there were 2, 3, 4 plugins all in plugin along, they would all be unloaded. And we can see it says plugin script state, plugin along has been unloaded. Great. So one of the things you might notice here is I have bound that command as an alias or as a shortcut. And we're going to go ahead and do that here so you can see how it's done. So let me go ahead and move those out. Cool. So if you wanted to have a shortcut, a quick shortcut that lets you just unload a plugin, we could go ahead and say /shortcut space the number of the slot it's going into. Now for the starting row, it's just 1 through 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we're going to put it into spot number 9. And the command is what we just did. Plugins unload plugin along. Now that makes a little thing here. You can see the plugins unload, plugin along alias down there. And if we start with it loaded, then if I click that, we can see that it unloads. And we can do something very similar. When you load a plugin, you're not doing it by the apartment name, though you're doing it by the plugin name. So if I do plugins load hello world ! We can see that worked. That loaded it here. So if we do /shortcut, and in this case we're going into spot 10, plugins load hello world ! Great. Let's try it out. Load, unload, load, unload. So instead of using the plugin manager, I'll be mostly using these shortcuts to load and unload, load the plugin and unload the apartment in which this plugin is in. So if you see the plugin load and or unload and load really fast, I'm just clicking these spots down here. Great, we don't even need that open anymore. I will probably regret that, but okay. Nothing new in chat, great. So a thing that is important to know about is that you can write code that causes errors, and these errors can be detected in a couple of different ways. And when you're developing plugins, you'll just see these a lot. It's fine. It doesn't really hurt anything. If you try to write some code, it doesn't work. It's not going to break LOTRO. It's not going to hurt your computer. It's fine. It just means the plugin didn't work. So don't be afraid to experiment. Let's take a look, though, at this main file. We already had this code here. Let's go ahead and type a syntax error. This is an error with how we have written the code, and put an extra equal sign right here. Oops. Sorry, I was trying to load. It was already loaded. Great. So this is where having the plugin manager doesn't hurt. I'll just sneak it in right behind there. Okay, so I tried to load this plugin, and there was a syntax error. Something was wrong with the language itself, and the file could not be loaded because it could not be parsed by the Lua interpreter. And when that happens, two things happen. You get an output as close as the interpreter can get to where the problem was, and the plugin stops loading. It is not loaded. It was never loaded. It is a dead plugin for now. So we can see that it says hello world main.lua. That's the file that we're in. And 4, that's the line it thinks the problem was on. And we can see unexpected symbol near equals equals. Now, that's not very helpful, but it does point us in the direction that the equal equals was the problem. And indeed, if we fix that and then press the load button, everything is fine. So that's a syntax error, and it stops your plugin from loading dead. Oh, excellent. For Andreas, that's a good point. For Andreas points out that there is a plugins list command, and when you do that, it does tell you the apartment name in the list. So we can see that the plugin is named Hello World, and it's the plugin along apartment. Fantastic. Now, just for curiosity, what does that look like when we run it here? We can see that it's just Hello World, because again, you can't load plugins by their apartment. You can only unload them. So excellent point. If you're ever looking for that apartment name, you can just do a /plugins space list. It's not available in the plugin manager, but it is available using the chat commands. Thank you for it, Andreas. Okay. The next type of error that we can have isn't a syntax one. Everything was written correctly as far as the language is concerned, but it's a runtime error. Something your plugin tried to do didn't work. So let's take a look at what could cause that. So I'm going to delete a couple of these things. We'll go ahead and change this up. Hello world plugin loaded. Great. Okay, so some code that, oh, I am sorry, I am going to need to pull up a second window where I have a different note that I wanted to bring up. Just a moment. Hopefully having too many Chrome tabs open doesn't lag my computer out. It's we're asking it to do a lot right now. There we go. This is what happens when you write some notes of things you want to cover late at night, is they don't all go in the correct location. It's okay. Okay. So, jumping ahead a little bit, what would it look like to draw a window on the screen? Well, it would look like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm distracting myself here. Just copy pasting this for a second. So I'm going to make a comment here that this is just telling Lua how to do this thing down here. This little code just says declare something called window, and it's going to be a LOTRO window. Set its position somewhere and make it visible. Now we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but that's okay. Hey look, it's a window! That's awesome. This is what's known as a LOTRO window, and it has this classic blue button at the top, these frilly things on the corner, and a little close button in the upper right. This is a standard look and feel for a LOTRO window. And this is code that is correct. Now, what would it be like to have a runtime error, an error that wasn't detected when the plugin was loaded, but causes a problem while the plugin is running? Well, what if we tried to call the function on window called setGandalf? Set that to true because this is a very Gandalfian window. Well, that's going to cause a runtime error. This is an error where it loaded the plugin and then it tried to do stuff and it said, well, I don't know what that was. So we're just going to stop right here. So we can see main.lua line 8, attempt to call method setGandalf on a nil value. What that really means is it tried to call a function and it does not know what that function is because that function is not part of Windows by default. Okay, nothing new in chat. I'm going to pause for a drink here. Okay, so first type of error, syntax error. You didn't write something correctly within the language. A runtime error, everything looked good, but when LOTRO tried to run the code, something went wrong. The final type of error that we're going to run into, and I run into it a lot, is a logic error. That is, I tried to do something and it didn't come out right. Let's take a look at that. Let's say I was trying to make the window 500 wide, 200 tall. Okay, so we get the 200 there, we get the 500 there, we get rid of this Gandalf thing, maybe we'll put that in later, and we go ahead and we load the plugin. Oh, I'm sorry, that was a position. Well, that is a logic error. That was me attempting to set the size, and instead setting the position. That happens a fair amount. That's easy enough to fix. Set size, spell it correctly, and reload the plugin. Okay, well that was also a logic plugin. I tried to make it 500 wide and 200 tall, and it is obviously not that. How do we know what went wrong? Well, if we go back to the plugin documentation, the API documentation here, let's go to the Turbine UI LOTRO Window section of the documentation and see what that can tell us. There's a lot of things you can do with a window. What we tried to do is set size. And we can see here, it thinks the width needs to come first and then the height needs to happen. That's the opposite of what it did. Well, that's easy enough to fix. We'll go ahead and put the 500 width first, the 200 height next, reload. Ah, excellent. That's definitely 500 wide, 200 tall. So that was two bonus examples of a logic error. The code was syntactically correct. There were no runtime errors. just you told it to do the wrong thing and it did it. It's probably the most common error that I experience because sometimes you just don't know how to get it to do the thing that you wanted to do. Okay. Well, that is kind of a whirlwind tour of Lua and the LOTRO plugin documentation and the just how to set up a Lua file to make a plugin load in some fashion. So, if there are any questions about what we've already talked about, I thought we'd go into a little bit more details on how to make something appear on the screen. We've already started with this window here, which is excellent, and we'll play around with that a little bit more. Okay, no frantic question in chat asking me to go back, so let's move along here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of that right line there. This is a plugin that does the very minimum to put something on the screen. We say import this package. This is Turbine UI LOTRO, and that's because we're trying to access this window definition inside of there. So where do we find it? Great, Lua is happy. What happens if we don't have that? Well, let's find out. Oh no! We see main.lua2 attempt to index field UI, a nil value. That is, it doesn't know what that is, and now it will. Excellent. What's the next line? Window. Window here might be a little deceiving. It doesn't mean anything. We can call it whatever we want. Our test window. That's just a variable that happens to currently be a turbine, a LOTRO window. Cool. What about this last thing? What does that do? Well, it says go ahead and make the window visible on the screen. What happens if we don't have it? Not much. The window is there. It is created in LOTRO's memory, but we can't see it. So we'll go ahead and put that back. Reload. Awesome. We can see a window. Now, when it shows up, it's showing up in the upper left-hand position. That is the position known as 0, 0. It's 0 from the left and 0 from the top. And that's a default position if you don't tell it to do something otherwise. Well, how do you do that? Well, it's not too bad. Set position. And then it takes two numbers, X and Y. We might actually call it left and top here. I tend to think of it as X and Y, but it's left and top here. Or is it top and left? Well, that's a great question. Let's go to our documentation. If we go to the set, well, that is a funny thing. Why won't you scroll down? Oh, well. If we come in here and we go to set position, left is first and then top. Great. So if we want left, let's say we want it to be, maybe 300 pixels out, and from the top, let's say 400, a little bit farther down than sideways. Cool. We can see that's what happened. It came out 300, it went down a little bit more than that, 400. You'd be able to see it better if it was not underneath the documentation. I'm going to have to squeeze things down here. Get out of here, documentation. No one wants you. Okay. So, without that set position, it goes into the upper left. Without that set visible, we never see it at all. Excellent. But with both of those, instead of going in the upper left, we can see it comes out and down. Yes, thank you in chat for reminding me not to cover things with other things. This will be tricky, but let's try to figure out maybe some place where we can get this thing to start showing up. 800. where it won't be immediately covered by things. Awesome, nice in the center right there. I love it. Maybe a little less down, and we're good to go. Perfect. So that's something that's very useful with plugins. If you have made, well, not a mistake, but you want to make a tweak to it, great. Change the file, reload the plugin, and just poke at it and see if what you changed works. Awesome. Okay. Set the position to the bottom right. That way we have the documentation in the window. I love it. Let's do it. We'll be playing around with moving the window later, but that is a lovely idea. So if we're currently 800 over, maybe 1200 would be enough, and maybe 700 down. What do we think? It's visible. Awesome. Thank you, Scary Laggy, for that suggestion. Okay, so that's sort of the bare minimum of making a window, making it visible, and putting it somewhere on the screen. But as we can see, it's kind of a small window. Maybe we could make it bigger by calling set size and giving it 2 numbers here. Now, with that documentation, awesome. Bring it back for a second. Thank you, little redhead. Cool. What's where's that set size command right there? Awesome. Width and then height. Okay. Well, if we want to make it wider, let's say 400, and then it is tall, say 200. What does that look like? Perfect. That's a window we can work with. Finally, you may have noticed that there's something different between this and the plugin manager window. I'll just sneak that out here. That little blue button at the top has text in it. That's the title of the window, or the text of the window. And that's something we can play with too. What would we want that to say? Well, it is very common to use hello world as starting text just to verify that you've done the thing. What happens when we do that? It says hello world. That's awesome. Now, I'm a little curious what happens if your text is too long for that button. So I'm just going to go ahead and unload, reload. It made the button bigger to a point. Now, it didn't make the button any bigger than the window, but you can see the button got as big as it could without running into the sides. That's lovely. Nicely done. And if we just have a tiny amount of text here, it seems like there's a minimum size for that button. Wow. Let's go ahead and put back our hello world. Lovely. There we go. Okay. So that's some basic making a window and moving it around and changing the size. Well, what else can we do? The game will not be very interesting if all we can do is make a window. Maybe we can add some more stuff to it. How about a button? I love buttons. Buttons are great. You can push them. So, our test button. Now, there is a reference in UI LOTRO for a button. Great. Let's try to make one of those. So, our button equals turbine.ui.lotro.button. What does that do? Well, not much by itself. Except for Windows, controls need to be contained within something else. A window is what's called a top-level control. It can exist by itself. But everything else needs to be in something else, nesting down until it finally hits a top-level control, but it has to be contained that way. So how do we tell that to Lua? Well, we can go ahead and say set parent to something that can show it. Oops. Like our test window. What happens if we do that? It's a bug. Awesome. That's a runtime error. I typed the wrong thing here. I meant to type button. Oh, I'm sorry. Button should be setting its parent to window. But it's nice of LOTRO to detect that and not crash on me or something. Okay. Well, we have added a button, And the button is in the very top left position, 0, 0, within its parent control because we didn't tell it a different location. Now you might say that looks like it's outside the window. It does look like it's outside the window, but the full space of the window is at the very top of where that hello world, the little leafy stuff, where those end, that's the actual top. And where the border is, that's the left. So if you want something to look like it's inside that darker black space inside, you need to take that into account. So let's do that now. Let's change its position. Our test button, set position. Now we remember from before that left is first and then top. So let's move it 25 from the left and 50 from the top and see what happens there. Neat, it did it. It moved 25 over, 50 down, awesome. It's kind of bare though. Now, just by itself, it comes with some default behavior. You may notice that it is a bluish color, but when I roll the mouse over, it becomes a lighter color. This is called a rollover effect. And it's a helpful affordance that tells you that the UI is responding and that you can do something. And you'll see this all over once you start noticing it. For instance, in the plugin manager, if I hover over the unload all button, it lights up as if saying, yeah, you can click me. And notice it doesn't happen for a disabled button. The load button is disabled. There's no rollover effect. And that gives you that sense of, nope, can't touch that. Yes, I can touch this. Same thing, when you click the button, it goes darker than normal. So that's the clicked and, oh, maybe it doesn't go too much darker. Oh, that's what it is. The text changes color to show you that you've clicked it. So the text is goldish there. It's still gold. You've clicked it. The text has changed color. That's a little bit of feedback that says, yes, you are clicking this control. So those are all things you get for free with the button, but nothing else, not even text on there. Well, let's change that. Our test button, set text, click, whoops, click me. Awesome. Now that's an excellent example of something that affects LOTRO plugins. And that's when you put text into the plugin, the buttons, labels, whatever it is, don't necessarily automatically resize to fit what you just put in there. There are ways around this. That thread I mentioned on the LOTRO forums covers this a little bit, and we'll get to it eventually as well. There are ways to kind of figure out, is this big enough? Make it bigger automatically. But for something simple like this, we might want to go ahead and just make it bigger ourselves. So let's come back in here and say set size. Well, you know, I don't know how big that is to begin with. Hang on a second. How do I know if I'm making it bigger or smaller? Well, let's go ahead and figure out what it is. So width, height equals our test button, get position. Now this is something you can do in Lua. Get position wants to return a tuple, 2 bits of information, both the width and the height. We can see that in our documentation. If we come into button members, get position, we can see that it's trying to return 2 numbers. Now, Lua lets you go ahead and assign those directly into 2 variables, just like that. So, turbine.shell.write line width. You can squish 2 pieces of text together called concatenation with the ... operator. Excellent. Where'd it go? Okay, we can see that this thing defaulted to 25 and... that's another logic error. I meant to say size. I did, and as for Andreas is pointing out into chat, I meant to say size, and I said get position, and that gave me the wrong answer. Gave me an answer, though, so that was nice to see. Okay, we can see that this thing started out 50 pixels wide and 20 pixels tall. Okay, let's fix that. Now that we know what it was, we can go ahead and say set size. Let's go ahead and just double it up, 100 and make it a little bit bigger, 25. What happens with that? Now, two things. The button got bigger, and because we did that first, and then we printed out what its current value is, we can see the updated values in chat. Excellent. Well, we have a button that says click me. We should click it. Well, I didn't do anything. Well, it changes the color, but that's about it. When you click a button, nothing happens by default. You as the plugin writer get to determine what happens. So let's make something happen. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that little test code. Okay. So, how do we respond to a mouse? Well, let's go back to this button members list of things. So, there's a methods section, but there's also an events section. Methods are things you can do to the button. You can tell the button to take focus or change its size or its position. Events are things that happen that you can know about. They're things that happen to the button, like being clicked, or like that's funny. Click and mouse click. All right. You can detect when the mouse cursor is over the button, or when the mouse cursor is left, or if the position changes somehow. That's usually more useful for like Windows, but you can know all of these things. Well, we want to know about being clicked. So let's write a click handler. What does that look like? Well, we can see that this is going to come with a sender and some arguments. Now, in this case, we're not going to pay too much attention to that, but those are available when you're doing something more complicated. In Lua, you can define a handler by defining a function right here. A function is defined first with a function, and then any arguments it's getting, and then the end statement ends that. Yes, how do we react to a mouse, says Talarian, get a trap. Well, that's a mean thing to do to my mouse. All right, we're going to go ahead and just confirm that we're doing the right thing. It is harder to type and talk than I was hoping it would be. Click. So we're going to write to the standard output anytime this button is clicked. All right, that sounds simple enough. Hey, look, I clicked the button and we see click. So we know that this is happening later. It's happening as a response to being clicked and not just when the plugin is loading. Well, that's pretty cool. Maybe we can do something more interesting though. What do we think? How about we just make the button move around? That sounds amusing. So we can get the position of the button. And we can just change it up. How about, let's move it 10 pixels more to the right. And 10 pixels further down. Well, we don't need that anymore, but what happens if we do that? Well, let's find out. Click it. Oh, the button moves. Click it again. And you can keep on moving it. In fact, if you keep on clicking it, you will move it right off the window. Now, it's not actually off the window, but it's outside the window's drawable space. And so it acts as if it's hidden. It's still there, and we'll see that later on as we explore other ways we can play with this. But for now, we'll just reset. The button starts back up here. I imagine one could make a little 9 puzzle solver where you've got the little empty spot and you click and things move around. Like, you could do that in a LOTRO plugin really easily. All right, enough of that. We have a button. We have a button. It's been positioned. We've changed the size. We've changed the text on there, and we've controlled what happens when the user clicks it. That's awesome. That gives us a lot of power. Still, sometimes we want to present information to the user and not have it be in button form. So Another thing that we use all the time are labels. So, where do we find a label? Well, we don't see one in the LOTRO section, LOTRO specific branded things, but we do have one in turbine.ui. We have a label. They even have some example code here, which is fantastic. When you find these bits of example code, it can be really helpful to kind of bootstrap your way into using a thing in your code. But for now, we can see that's in a different package. So we want to go ahead and import turbine.ui. And we'll even say, tells how make a label. Great. Button. Oops. Okay, so in that case, we can do turbine.ui.label. All right, we've got a label. Well, just like before, making the label doesn't really do anything. A label, just like a button, has to be contained within something, within a top-level control. Well, that's easy enough to do. Our test label, set parent to our test window. Okay. Well, there's a label there, but we forgot to put any text in there, so it's not saying anything. Let's fix that now. Set text. And this is a label. Let's make it really obvious what's going on. Awesome. Well, we can see, just like with a button, a label's default position is at 0 left and 0 top, which puts it all the way in the upper left corner of whatever it's in this case, the window. And that just reminds us again, the window's boundaries are bigger than that black area that we see, that we think of as the window. It includes all of that space, and that's how the window can draw its own border there. But that won't do for us. We need to put that somewhere where it's a little bit more readable. So let's go ahead and change it up. Our test label, set position. Now, we want to avoid being on top of the button right now, just so it's a little bit more usable. We can see the button is 25 over and 50 down. Let's make it 25 over and 100 down. See what happens with that. Awesome. That got it off of the border there. Oh, I see a question. Scary Leggy, you are asking or pointing out something, and I'm not sure I've got it quite straight. You can use, for example, our test window without declaring it as a local variable, but are doing it for those positions. Is declaration only relevant for basic values, but not for objects? I'm not sure if this is answering your question directly, but if you declare something at the top level here as a local, then when the code is done executing that scope, in which case when it hits the bottom of this file, locals are discarded. And so if I go ahead and declare the window as a local, we can see it pops up, but then the code finishes executing and it goes away again. And we can just do that over and over. So that is a thing I see, is you're asking about locals, and these are being declared, because they're not being declared as locals, they're going to persist around. They're more like globals. Now, I'm not a Lua expert, and there may be terminology that I get wrong, but I would associate that with the concept of globals from other languages. Now, I don't know if that answered what you were speaking directly. Let's see. Well, let me know. Let me know if you want to delve into that a little bit more. Oh, excellent. Yes. So in this function here that we have declared, I went ahead and declared these as locals because I didn't want them to stick around. I just wanted them to be used and go away. If I had said left and top, new left, new top, these would create global variables because we haven't seen them before, and they would be usable from other places. sometimes that's exactly what you want. Right now, not so much. So my default is to declare things local, that is, get rid of them when we're done with this bit of code, unless there's a good reason to do otherwise. Awesome. Oh, well, we're going to need to save that file or that window's not going to come back. Awesome. Well, we were just looking at that label. We can see that label is kind of wrapping its text there. What happens if there's a lot of text? Well, that is another example of how controls are not going to automatically resize to fit the thing that is in there. Like I said, there's ways around that. We'll cover that in the future. But for now, let's just go ahead and make that thing bigger. Our test label, set size, and, well, is another question. How big is that thing? So let's find out. Local width height equals our test label get size, and then go ahead and spit that back out. So turbine.shell.writeLine and width. So sometimes it's a little awkward to write all of this in one place. We can actually just declare that in its own little variable. And we can go ahead and drop that text variable that contains the stuff we want. We can put that into the right line, and that can make it a little bit easier to read things when we come back. Okay. We can see that its default size was 50/50. Yagir is skipping ahead to something we are going to talk about today, which is making the window resizable. That's actually a really good question. Right now, the window, by default, windows are not resizable. You have to do something special to make them resizable, and we are going to get to that, definitely. In the meantime, we can see that this thing is 50 by 50. You know, it doesn't really look 50 by 50. I'm gonna do a thing that we can do. Our test label. When I'm having trouble figuring out where things are in the UI and how much space they're taking up and what they really look like, I'll just go ahead and set the background color. And when I can't remember how that's spelled, is it back or background? Set back color. Great. Set back color. And while in game, you're going to see color spelled with a U in the British style. For LOTRO plugins, they use an American style of spelling for words like color. That's just something to keep in mind if you're switching back and forth from typing in game and typing in a plugin. Color without a U is the way to go here. Turbine.ui.color. And there are some preset colors. So let's see if dark red is a preset color. Awesome. Now, this is a way to visualize what's really going on with that label. Now, a label is just a control that can display some text. It's not very complicated. We can see there's no fancy borders here. There's just a box, and there's some text in the box. So, now that we know how big it is, it's a 50 by 50 box. Yeah, I mean, I see it now. I wasn't seeing it before because the background was the same as the black. I totally see it now. So, now that I see that, you know what? I don't need to type that over and over. Let's just comment that out. Come back in here and set the size to be something better. Let's call it 200, and you know, if it's that wide, we probably only need to be about 25 tall. Let's try that out. Awesome. You know what? We'll give ourselves room to grow. Great. Now, we can see it's a really long label. Now, I did say controls don't get bigger to contain what's in them, but we can see that the label understands how to wrap text. So what do I mean by that? If we had longer text here, really long label, it would understand to go ahead and put it on the next line and the next line. So that's a pretty helpful compromise. It's not going to make the control bigger if it runs out of space. If we add a few more in there, it's not going to help us out with that. We can see that's run off the end there. But up until that point, it does go ahead and wrap those lines of text. So it's doing a little bit of work for us. It's not doing everything, but it's doing something. Okay. Let's put that back until it's readable. Awesome. Very cool. Okay. So we have a window, and we have a button, and we have a label. So we've already seen one event for the button where you click it and we can respond to that. So what are some other ways that we can detect that the user is interacting with us? Well, one of the first things is just moving this window around. That's something we do all the time. We position things, we change things, and it's really useful as a plugin to know when that's happening. So what does that look like? Well, I see I've just partially covered that window. Don't worry, we'll refresh that in a minute anyway. Just occurred to me, I can drag this over and make it a little bit easier on myself. Pardon me while I rearrange my windows. Excellent. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, we're talking about a window. We're not just talking about a window, we're talking about a Turbine UI LOTRO window. What's the difference? Well, the LOTRO window has this nice little fancy border and has the blue button there, and so that's what we're using today. Let's take a look at that. Oh, sorry, I've just refreshed, no worries. We're going to come on in here. So, we're talking about events. We want to react to what the user is doing. What are some things we can do? Well, position changed. That sounds like what happens when you drag the window around. This event is fired when the position of the control changes. Great, that's exactly what we wanted. Let's play around with that. Now, you can keep all of your code for a control together, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'm just going to keep typing at the bottom here because that way we can just not go back and touch that other stuff. So our test window, we want to do something for its position changed. So we go ahead and declare an anonymous function here that can take two parameters. We're not going to worry about them too much right now, but if we needed to know, we could see that the sender is going to be the event sender, so it's going to be the window, and the arguments are going to be, well, that's not very helpful. This documentation is not as full-fledged as it could be, and so sometimes you're left with kind of figuring out what it is on your own. Well, there are some techniques for that. We'll talk about that when it becomes a little bit more useful. But for right now, we're not even going to worry about that because we know exactly what it is that's sending this thing. So, oh my goodness, my documentation's on top of my face. There we go. That's okay. That's not what we're here to look at. So, what are we doing here? Well, I mean, the easiest thing, as always, is let's just get the information we want and spit it out to the console. So, if we have a local left and top equals our test window get position. That's going to be a better spelling of that. And then turbine, well, let's local text equals left and concatenate in the value there. And top, and concatenate that value there. And now we have a string that we can output. Turbine.shell.writeLine. Now what happens if we leave off the L in writeLine? Does that work? Is Lua case sensitive? Let's find out. Attempting to call writeLine. So this is an excellent example. Lua is case sensitive. It needs you to type things, either capital L or lower L in this case, exactly correctly. It doesn't work like some languages where as long as you get the word right, it doesn't matter about capital or lowercase letters. Okay, well, now that we've tried that little experiment, let's come on in here and load this. Oh, cool. So it positioned itself immediately. We can go ahead and see that its left is at 1200, its top is at 700. That sounds familiar. Ah, that's because we put it there. Nice. Okay, what happens if we drag this? Now, this is going to spam chat a lot, but you can see every time the position moves, we're sending information to the standard log. So if I move it over here, if I move it up here, all of the time, it is spitting out that information. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us two things. we have very precise locations of where the window is, and we should probably not do anything that's very computationally expensive. We should not try to do a lot of stuff every time the window moves, because you can see we're getting a bunch of those every second. I'm going to take a guess and say 10 to 20 of those every second. Let's see, we can actually come back and check. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. More than 10 a second. Call it about 12 a second. So if you're doing something that takes a lot of time and effort to calculate every time the window moves, that's going to give really poor performance, and users of your plugin just are not going to have a good time with that. So whatever you're doing during an event handle like this should be fast. Maybe just save the value and be done. Speaking of, let's stop writing that out to the right line, to the shell, because I feel like that is slowing things down. Yeah, that's moving a little bit better. Okay, so well, we have the left, we have the top. What are we going to do with it? Well, we can do one better. We can actually update the label instead of the writing to the standard output. What does that look like? Well, we can do our test label, set text, and we can set it with the text. Excellent. Let's come on back here. Let's unload. Let's reload. And we can see now it says left 1200, top 700. And as we're dragging this around, we can see it is updating all the time. If I drag it all the way to the top is 0. That makes sense. If I put it all the way at the bottom, we can see the top is 802 down from there. And I don't know, can we still see it all the way over? We can. We can see that the left is 1500, the top is 800. So we can see the upper left position of this window at all times. Well, that's pretty cool. So, someone mentioned a question a little while ago. Jaeger asked, can you make the window resizable by the user, just dragging a corner? Yes, you can. Let's take a look at that. What is that? What would it take to do that? Well, we have some documentation here. We have a window. Resize. Well, we have an accessor. We can get if the window is resizable. Let's keep looking. Set resizable. Sets if the window is resizable. All right, let's take a look. All right, it takes a value. The value is of type Boolean. If you're not familiar with programming, Booleans are values that are either true or false. And in Lua, you use the keywords true or false directly. So if we come on in here, oh, this file is getting a little long, isn't it? No worries. If we come in here, we can say our test window set resizable true. And this is what I was saying. If you're using a Boolean in Lua, you're either going to say false or true. You can see that my text editor knows that those are special words, keywords. And these are also case sensitive. If we try to use a capital T here, when we come back in and reload, well, that didn't work. The window's not resizable. Funny enough, it didn't produce an error, and this actually caught me on one of my plugins, the deed tracker, a while back. I accidentally used a capital T, and a whole bunch of things that should only have shown up on the legendary servers started showing up on every server. So watch out for that. It's not an error, it just doesn't do what you want it to do. So let's set that to resizable, lowercase true, and see what happens here. Okay, so we have a window. When we hover over the corners or an edge, the cursor changes into a drag cursor, or I should say a resize cursor. Now this is similar to other windowing systems. You can resize from any edge, so you can make it narrower or wider from the left or the right. You can make it taller or shorter. And this acts like other resizable windows, like the plugin manager here. You can resize it from here. You can, well, that didn't work. You can resize it from here. So this just enables that behavior that works for any LOTRO window that is resizable. Okay, Well, we can move it and see information about it, and we can resize. How about we do another label where we can see the size? That sounds like a good similar activity here. So our test label, you know what? Our test label's not a very useful name. Let's call it our position label. Now, if you're using a text editor where you can do a multi-select like this, our position label, then you're just done. But if you're using any other text editor where you might have to do a find and replace, so our position label, you might do that instead. Whatever works for you. I like multi-selects, but they're not for everyone. Okay, let's go ahead and make sure we haven't broken anything by renaming that. Excellent, we're still good. So let's go ahead and say our size label equals a turbine.ui.label. Let's go ahead and say, well, I'm going to just copy that. Our size label set parent is our test window. Awesome. We're going to set the text. It doesn't actually matter what we set here because it's going to be overwritten later on, but it's nice to put something there. So we're going to go ahead and set our position. You know what? That click me button is just in the way. Let's move it. So the position, let's go ahead and move that over a little bit because I would like this label to be pretty near the other one. So the other one was at 2500. Let's set this one at 2550. Our size label set size. You know what? We can make it a little bit smaller. And let's go ahead and set the background color so that we can see them side by side. Turbine.ui.color.blue. Okay. Well, let's see if that did anything. Awesome. The click me button went away. We can make it go more away. We can see it just says size, and we can see that the position label is showing the position. All that's left is to hook ourselves up to the Windows resize function. Well, we can see we haven't done that yet. Okay, well, what does that look like? Coming back to the documentation. Whoops. We know it's going to be an event, so we can just collapse the methods. We know its size. Size changed. How about that? Let's come on in here. We can see, same thing, sender args. We're going to see a lot of consistency when it comes to that kind of thing. So our test window, we're going to go ahead and size changed equals an anonymous function that takes a sender and some args. And what are we doing here? Well, local, we have width and height from our test window get size. Okay. We're going to go ahead and just format that into something nice. Width, concatenate with height. I really love interpolated strings in C#. They make reading this kind of thing much easier, but that's okay. We can still do a lot of powerful stuff here. So our size label, set text to be that text. And again, these are local variables. They're just going to disappear and be recreated later. All right, well, let's take a look. What happens when we do that? First thing, we can see that the size text went away. It was replaced when the window was first positioned and sized on the screen. And the second thing we can do is see that just like when we move the window around, the position updates. When we resize, we can see that the size values are changing as well. Now, this isn't the most functional of plugins, but it's reacting to a user's input. We are clicking on things, we are moving the window around, we are resizing the window, and we are able to detect that within the plugin code and do something. And that's kind of the foundation of a lot of plugins, is the user pokes the plugin in some way, like the waypoint plugin. Like I said, I'm quite fond of it. You click the plugin, it refreshes where it is, it does the thing, it redraws. Some plugins can go a very long distance with just these basic concepts. So, one other thing that I wanted to check in about is something that happens when you start making a resizable window. notice that nothing on the screen is moving around. And in fact, if we bring the window in, we can actually cut off that button. The button's still there, but if it goes outside the bounds of the window, those parts are not drawn. Only things that are on top of the top level controls drawing area can be drawn. So that is something to pay attention to. If you have resizable windows, you probably want to take that into account when you are reacting to that resize. You might want to change where things are. For instance, if I drag this window around, you can see this combo box gets wider or less wide. We can see this control in here stays about, let's call that 5 to 10 pixels away from the border. And the label in here, we can see that it is resizing because it is wrapping that text. That text isn't just spooling off out of the end of the window. So making a window resizable isn't just as simple as ticking that little box and saying, yes, be resizable. That's good for the window, but it doesn't cover everything else. Oh, it is behind my code window. Thank you. It's one of the few times where I want this window. As I was saying, when you make the window narrower or wider, we can have the combo box getting narrower or wider, and we can see how this border here stays a consistent distance away. I'm making sure I can see it this time. And we can see how that text starts wrapping because the label it's in is getting less wide. Thank you for Andreas. So resizing window, enabling that, means your window can resize, but it doesn't mean everything within the window is going to react sensibly to that. Now, can we do something about that? Well, sure. Let's give it a try. In fact, let's just play around with that button. When we say that the size has changed, what if we just stuck that button to the right side here, just like we can see that border here is stuck to the right side? What if we just stuck our button to the right side? What would that look like? I don't know. Let's find out. So we want to know, well, how wide is the button? All right. Local button width equals our test button get width. And we want to know that because we need to plant its position that far away from the border. Okay. Now that we know how wide the button is, we can say we know how wide the window is. Awesome. Local button left, new button left equals width minus button width. Okay. Now that width right here isn't very helpful. Maybe we could have called it a window width. Are we using anything else? All right. Window width. Oh, that's changing more than I want it to. All right, we'll just have to deal. That's the window width. That's the button width. And then our test button set position. I don't know. What are we looking for here? Button members set left. Awesome. That's its left position of the window. That's what we want. Set new button left. Well, what happens if we do that? Make sure we can still see that. Okay, well, first of all, we can see that it is stuck to the right side, and when we change the width, the button is staying in that specific spot of the window. In fact, if we move this up a little bit. Now, we didn't change anything about its height. All we did was change where its left position was to be a specific fixed distance away from that right border. Now, what happens if we click that button? Remember, if we click the button, it moves. Well, as soon as we resize the window, we've changed where its left is to be that specific. We haven't changed the height. Oh no, it's gone, but we can snap it back onto the window during that resize. All right, what about now? Well, now it did get snapped back, but the window was too short for that. Neat. Now, for more complicated plugins, I'm thinking things like MiniRaid that let you click and drag elements around the screen. You can do things, even with a button, where you respond to a click and drag by moving the element on the screen. We haven't done that. We've just made it move a little bit when you click it. In fact, it's getting too big. Let's restart. Oh, thank you, Little Red Hood. Yes, some of those plugins are fantastic. In fact, I would say all of them are great. Not all of them are for me, but Daily Task Travel Window, which is not loaded on my system right now, but it's great, especially if you're a hunter. Okay. The one other thing that comes into play when you start allowing your window to be resized is the fact that some controls are going to be on top of other controls. And let's take a look at what that means. We can see that the label is on top of the button. Why is that? Well, it's probably because the label got added after the button, and we just add things onto here like you're piling things onto a surface. We can even test that out and see if that's the case. That is the size label. So what if our button just got added after our size label? Neat. Now the button's on top. Because we added the label, we added the button. Okay. There are ways you can control that without having to just make sure you add them in the right order. This is called a Z order. It's not X, it's not Y, it's Z. It's how deep things are. And the Z order by default is just determined by the order that you're adding these things in, but you can change that. For instance, instead of moving that around, we'll go ahead and, well, that's not where that was. Instead of moving around that, well, let's see what the documentation has to say about this. Because, I don't know. We have a Z order. We can set the Z order. Okay, what does it do? We'll set the current Z order. Controls with a higher Z order will render on top of controls. Well, neat. Let's take a look at that. Our size label, set Z order, capital Z, capital O, and let's say it is a 2. And let's go back up to our test button. Our test button, set Z order, and make that a 1. What happens when we do that? Well, we can see that the label is on top of the button. Well, that's what we expected, because the label has a higher Z order than the button. What if the button is now a 5? Well, we can see the button is on top of the label. What happens if they have the same Z order? I don't know. Let's find out. Z order 1, Z order 1. Does it just default to the order of adding? Let's find out. Yes, it does. So if they have the same Z order, it looks like the tiebreaker is which one was added last. So things can be on top of each other. But that means all of these are on top of the window. That's how we're seeing them. So the last thing I want to talk about with the windows here is notice how when I make the window small enough, this label is now on top of the border. Now, why is that a problem? Because the mouse has to be over the border in order to resize the thing. Oh, what happens? There was a question about what happens if you click the button when it's behind. Well, that actually ties exactly into this. By default, whatever is on top gets the mouse clicking. So in this case, the labels are getting clicked, which is not very helpful because labels, by default, don't do anything when you click them. So we can actually make this a little bit wider. So we can see clicking the button there was fine. Let me reposition it underneath that label. So we can click the button over here. What about over here? Well, we can see the rollover color change when we're over the button, but when we're over the part of the button that's under the label, there's none of that. It doesn't know the mouse is over there. If I click here, it doesn't see that either. The label is absorbing the mouse click event, and nothing behind it is seeing anything. And that's the same problem that we're having here with the label in the bottom right of the window. We can't click the window because we're clicking the label. Now, for Andreas, That's an interesting question. Does it bring the button up? Well, not by default, but that's certainly something we can do. So the first thing is, it is possible to tell a control to ignore the mouse, or rather tell LOTRO not to tell the control about the mouse. Let's take a look at what that would look like. So we don't want these labels to see this. Let's go to label, let's go to members. This is probably a method. Let's search for mouse. Set mouse visible. Gets a flag. That's funny. It should be set. If you find the occasional error in these, that happens. Okay, let's look at set mouse visible. Sets a flag indicating if the mouse is visible to the control. If the mouse is not visible, then controls underneath it will handle mouse messages. Well, that sounds great. We should do that. Let's go ahead and set both of these labels to not be mouse visible. First of all, firstly, we're going to go ahead to the position label. No, the size label. This is messing me up. That they are in, they have been flip-flopped. Let me go ahead and change their position. Will I regret this? I might regret this. Let's give it a try. Okay. We're going to change their sizes too while we're at it. Okay. Unload, reload. Well, whatever I just did, I think I hit a hotkey that said comment out this line. Great. Okay, so now we can see excellent. So now we can see that the position label, the one on top, is over the button. Let's go ahead and set our position label. We're going to go ahead and set mouse visible to false. And remember, that's a lowercase f. What happens when we go ahead and reload that plugin? Well, we can see when we roll over where the button is, we can see that it's getting the mouse event. And if I click where the button is, we can see it's getting that too. Now, let's see what happens if I actually click it. Well, nothing happened there but to bring it to the top, but it did execute its normal handler. Well, what if we wanted the button to come to the top? What if this was a common problem? Well, let's see. We have a button handler that handles the click. What if we just incremented its Z level every time we clicked it? So local Z order, I'm sorry, I should say Z order. So our test button, get Z order, local new Z order equals Z order plus, well, let's be generous and say 10. Well, we'll just give it a bump. And then our test button, set Z order, new Z order. There we go. What happens if we do that? So we can see that was enough to bring it on top. Now, what if I stopped that thing from moving around? It's getting uncovered. So we can see by making the label not see mouse events, we were able to let the button see them instead. What if we wanted both of them to be clickable, but we also wanted to play with the Z order? Well, labels can be clicked. We don't think of clicking labels very often, but we can do it. And in the documentation, we can see that under events, we have a mouse click. Oh, let's play with that. Our position label, mouse click equals an anonymous function, getting the sender and the args. And when we click that, we actually just want to do the exact same thing. Let's go ahead and copy paste that code here. And it will help if we grab all of it. And instead of our test button, we're just going to do it to our position label instead. And you know what? That test button moving around is excellent, but we're going to go ahead and stop that for just a moment. We just want to play with Z order right now. Okay, so let's come on in. Let's unload that. Let's load that up and resize that a second. Okay, so the button says click me. If you click it, its Z order has just been increased by 10, firmly placing on top of the label. Oh no, clicking the label didn't do what I wanted it to do. Well, what's going on there? Well, either you can't do the Z order over label like I thought, or I've done something else wrong. Or, is that the position? Yes, it is a position. Well, let's check. Is this happening at all? Let's come back here. So we have turbine.shell.writeLine. And this is a simple debug. And we're going to say, you know what? This will be nice and easy. We can see that it's not doing that. And as For Andreas has correctly surmised, it's the set mouse visible. We meant to go disable that because we were playing around with other things, and we didn't. And so the clicking never happened. Go ahead and undo that, come back in, click me, raise it up, click in the label, excellent. We've gotten that, so we're good to go. We're good to go ahead and say, this is working. We can go ahead and uncomment out that code and go back to what we were doing. Excellent. Figuring out why things aren't working the way you think they should be working is a really good skill, and you're going to get to practice it a lot. So, click me. Oh no, it's still not doing quite what I wanted. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So we can see that the Z order is changing, but the control isn't being redrawn right away. It's being redrawn when something else happens. That's excellent. That's a problem that is probably label specific because the label isn't being sent in a redraw command all the time. Whereas the button, when you click it, it has to change colors, and when it changes colors, that redraw also takes into account the Z order. That's fascinating. Are there ways around that? Of course there are ways around that. Now this is going a little bit off the deep end. This wasn't on my agenda, my plan, but let's see if we can make something really fast. So, how do we get force the system to tell us to update? Well, that's actually right here in the API documentation. We search for update, get wants updates, set wants updates. Let's see if we can do something about that. Now, it may be that just asking for that update is enough. So, our position label, set wants updates is true. We don't normally want to do that a lot because this causes the game to have to work harder. Every time it redraws the screen, it says, hey, do you want to do anything? Hey, do you want to do anything? Hey, do you want to do anything? But we can get around that. We can say our position label, and it's called update. We can declare that to be a new function. I take the center and args, and turns this off. So we just get it once. We just get a little ping. I don't know if this is going to work. We're just trying things out here. But let's take a look at that. Okay, so we click the button, it comes on top. We click the label, that wasn't enough. So that's an unsolved problem for today. Hopefully I'll be able to get a chance to dig into that before we revisit that. But that is excellent. Oh, I'm gonna have to think about that. Okay, let me write that down. Outstanding question. How do we get the label to pop on top? Nice. I like learning things that I don't know. In the meantime, we can solve the same problem of not being able to change the size of the window because the label's on top of it. Same solution. We can go ahead and say our size label, set mouse visible to false. And if we do that, we come back in and load back up, we can see that even though this is covering the border still gets the mouse because the label isn't receiving any of those. It's passing straight on through to whatever is right below it. In this case, that's the window itself. Festival, thank you, Moobot. I am so excited that, as far as I can tell, the festival is going to run just long enough that you can get the full 12 days on Treebeard and that other server that doesn't matter. So I'm kidding, it's Shadowfax, but Treebeard's the good one. So we're gonna be hopping on there tomorrow and starting our run through the festival because I think we can just eke out all 12 days for the the meta wrapper. That's gonna be excellent. Okay, so setting whether a control gets mouse events can override these problems when one label is on top of, when one control is on top of another, even if the control that it's on top of is the window itself. You can still bypass that. If for some reason you can't make the label smaller, you can just make it not care about the mouse events. Awesome. Okay. Well, we are about 20 minutes to the hour here, and that was really a lot of what I wanted to cover today. How do you make a window appear on the screen? How do you make a button appear on that window? How do you make a label appear on the window? How do you respond to the user doing things, pushing buttons, moving windows, resizing windows? How do you know that that's happening, and how do you do something with that information? And we've gotten all that. We've got a window that we can move around, we can resize, and we've got things reacting to those movements, to those resizes. And we even went on a digression of Z-order, which I wasn't even expecting to do. Thank you so much for that inspiration. So we can either call it here, or we can go off on a side project of mine, which is to look at what does it look like when you're debugging an existing plugin, or when you're trying to add a feature to an existing plugin. So if you have any thoughts on that, put them into chat. I'm gonna, oh, my water's out. I wonder if I could ask the water person to bring me more water. But in the meantime, if we're going to take a look at that, let me pop into my downloads folder and grab the Titan bar. Titan bar is amazing. And if you hadn't had a chance to use it yet, I highly recommend you give it a try. It's got a lot of things it can do, but the one specific one, thank you, is tracking festival currencies. I don't know about you, but when I'm doing something like the Midsummer Festival and acquiring all these Midsummer tokens, it gets a little nerve-wracking to not know how close I am to that cap, because we can see Midsummer tokens have a cap of 250. I'm at 217. If I were to run through again tomorrow, then I would probably hit that cap. I don't want to hit that cap, so what can we do about that? All right, well, in walks Titan bar. Let me go ahead and put that into place here. We talked about last time how you can go about installing these things. You can just manually download them and unzip them and put them into the plugins folder. You can also use the plugin compendium to automatically download and install plugins. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it, but I happen to have Titan bar in my downloads folder, so that was fine. So I've gone ahead and loaded the Titan bar plugin here. Oh, we have a question in chat that came in. Do you know what the Z order the loading screen has? I noticed there are plugins that display on the loading screen. I suspect it has something to do with the Z order. That's a fascinating question. I don't have specific knowledge of the loading screen Z order, but what I can tell you is that it is difficult for plugins to tell what state the screen is in. For instance, there's a keyboard shortcut. For me, it's F12. Let me see. Key mapping. to toggle the HUD on and off. That is, all of the things that are not the prettiness. When you press that, plugins can receive that information that that key has been pressed, but what it doesn't tell them is whether the HUD is turning off or if the HUD is turning on. And this is okay. If your plugin has been loaded from the very beginning, then when you log in, the HUD is on by definition. And so from then on, if you track it each time, HUD's off, HUD's on, HUD's off, HUD's on. You might notice the Hello World plugin that we've been playing with, it's not hiding itself because we haven't taught it how to listen for that keystroke yet. Excuse me. So, I was just thinking, what plugin would really show this? No, that's okay. So, the state that the screen is in, if it's off or if it's on, is confused. If you press the escape button, you can see the HUD came back, but plugins don't get told about that. So you can see the Titan bar is off. And if I swap the HUD, it thinks that the HUD is on when it's actually off. If I press escape, it overrides the HUD, comes back, but plugins aren't told about that. So it is quite easy for a plugin to think it should be drawn, and because that's the information that's been told, it said you are on, but that did not actually be correct because of one of these little edge cases. So that being said, if you see a plugin during a loading screen, it's probably not intentional, either because of the plugin or LOTRO. Like, that shouldn't happen, but drawing things is hard. doing graphical user interfaces is hard. If it happens consistently, if a plugin consistently shows up on a loading screen, that's cool. I'd love to know. Oh, an event timer. Oh, interesting. So it's constantly updating itself? Oh, that's neat. I mean, almost sounds like a feature, not a bug, if you're seeing it all the time, if you want to know what the time is and it's constantly updating. Oh, that's neat. Let me make a note. Okay. Where is my notes section? Okay. That's any question. Plugins showing up on loading screens. Awesome. Oh, excellent question from Egg Arthur. Any idea why Titan Bar has 3 plugins, 2 of which aren't to be loaded? I do have an idea why. Let's open the plugin manager back up. I'll just close that. Okay, so my window's on top of it. Oh my goodness, we don't even need that right now. We're gonna hide that. Awesome. Okay, so you have correctly read the about information that says it should not be loaded. Oh, I mean, that's a good question. What happens if you load it? What happens if I load the unloader? Well, not much. It unloaded Titan Bar. The reason they say you shouldn't do that is an abundance of caution. You don't really hurt anything if you hit the reloader or if you hit the unloader. What you're doing is, I shouldn't speak too authoritatively. From my experience, what you are doing is just manually triggering these 2 menu items, unload or reload. Now, the way this works is internally, there's no way to tell LOTRO, please unload my plugin and reload it. There's not even a good way to say, please unload my plugin. What you do have is, please unload that other plugin over there, that one, yes, that. And so what you can do is you can load another plugin and you can unload another plugin, and by their powers combined, I load that plugin over there, and when that plugin loads, it unloads me. Or it unloads me and reloads me. Why is this useful? Sometimes plugins just benefit from being reloaded. I certainly do that when I'm doing plugin development. I want to reload that plugin, and we've seen how useful that is to be able to unload and reload plugins rapidly in order to test things. I'm not sure specifically why Titan Bar ships with that, but it's built right here into the menu, and that's all it's doing, is it's loading another plugin, and that plugin is responsible for unloading the first plugin, because there's no way to tell LOTRO, please unload me. Okay. For Andres, likes Wallet better than Titan Bar. I haven't tried using Wallet, but I use Titan Bar for a bunch of other things like time of day and just general heads up information. And so it was a natural thing to use it for that as well. If you like using a different plugin, by all means. I mean, there's no competition here. There's a wide ecosystem of awesome plugins. Rashwan asks, how long is the stream going to be available? Little Redhead has answered that. Thank you very much. It'll be available on the Twitch stream and on YouTube. There will also be a blog post covering a lot of the things we've talked about today, not necessarily the digressions, but definitely the major points I wanted to touch on. And there'll be some screenshots from in-game and that kind of thing. So look out for that. It'll be linked to from the YouTube video. Thank you, Little Redhead. I do like the deed tracker plugin. It could use some work, but I like it. Okay, so that is Titan Bar's, that is the explanation of why these two things exist. If you do not like those things, and if you do not find yourself ever using the unload or reload options, then, well, I've got a deal for you. In fact, can I share a window? I bet I can share a window here. New source, window capture, plugins. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Neat. I can just smack that here in the middle. Okay, cool. So, Titan Bar is shipped in the Havna plugins folder. And in this folder, you can see Titan Bar.plugin, Titan Bar.reloader, and Titan Bar Unloader.plugin. If you do not want to see those listed here, and also don't want to be able to use that functionality, you could delete those .plugin folder files, and then when you refresh, it's not going to show up here anymore. The only things that show up here are, oh, sorry, my window's on top. Sorry, I hit the refresh button and those two went away. So, I've got to get better about that. So, Titan Bar Reloader and Unloader, delete those, refresh this. The only things that show up in the plugin manager list, or if you type /plugins list, the only things that show up here are things that have a .plugin file. No .plugin file, it does not show up there. It's also not available though. So if I come in here and I say unload Titan Bar, at best it's going to cause an error. It looks like they accounted for that, but it could not unload itself. Now, with Titan Bar, you can do a /plugins unload Titan Bar, specifying the apartment name that Titan Bar is loaded in. That's essentially all that unloader is probably doing. It's just saying, find that apartment, unload it. And that's why you can do without it. You can also do a plugin /load Titan Bar. So if you don't want to have those two extra unloaders and loaders in there, and you don't mind the fact that these two menu buttons will do nothing, you can delete those files. Things that are in the plugins folder are under your control. And that's a beautiful thing, because if there is a bug, you can go in and fix those things. Okay. Talirian asks, do you think a quest tracker would be possible in addition to a deed tracker? Yes-ish. So the deed tracker plugin, which I have done development work on, isn't taking advantage of LOTRO features that say a deed is done. Instead, it has to look at your chat window, and when something says you have completed Deeds of Breland, it looks at a long list of deeds and says, well, there's a deed called that, so you just completed a deed. So it's a lot of guesswork. Now, you can do the same thing with quests, and you can say you completed In Their Absence Chapter 10. You see that in the chat log. You can say, okay, well, I see a corresponding quest. I can mark that off. I think the exciting thing about a quest log, a quest tracking plugin, would be more showing you what's available at your level, especially with Treebeard coming up, because I would very much like to do things like the Shire and Ered Luin, and is there anything else that's level 1 to 10? I don't know. Like, it's that question right there. What else is there before I take off my stone, go to level 11? What else is there before I go to level 15? And knowing that within game, I think that'd be really cool. But it also sounds like a lot of work, and so it won't be me doing it before we move house in August. But if someone else wants to take that on, hit me up at lotrodeedtracker@gmail.com and we can talk. Rashman says, well, talking about plugins, well, that's all we're doing here. Is Prime just buggy with me, or is it not working at the moment? I don't actually use Prime as a plugin. I think a friend of ours did. Is that the one that, like, you start an encounter in an instance and it pops up information about that encounter, like, watch out for the warband maneuver or stuff like that? If it is, it sounds really cool, but I haven't used it, so I can't tell you if it's working or not. That being said, I don't know of any specific updates to LOTRO recently that would cause something to be buggy, except around update 29 or so, LOTRO internally changed, I think, how plugin data saved certain types of things like numbers, and it did cause some plugins some information there. But if you're not having a problem loading your saved data or saving or loading files, then I don't think that would come into play. Okay, well, we're done showing that window. Awesome. Okay, so you know, it's funny. I deleted those files, and now I would like to not have them deleted. let me put those back real fast. Unfortunately, my undo button isn't. It's just making my computer go ding, so that's okay. Back to downloads. Titan bar. Now, I had moved stuff instead of copying stuff, so I'm just going to re-extract the zip file, copy them over. Greetings from Germany. Awesome. We're in the Netherlands, same time zone, as the little redhead is saying. Now, whether it should be the same time zone is a different question, but we currently are. So, yes, we're coming up on 11 p.m. here. Okay. So we've got those back. We can refresh this, and now if we do a reload on Titan bar, it's able to tell LOTRO, please load this other plugin, and that other plugin says, please load this one, and then when Titan bar comes back, it unloads the reloader or unloader if they're there. And in fact, you can see that. If we load the reloader, despite, oh, right, of course not. If we load the unloader, we can see that LOTRO thinks that plugin is loaded. It is. It did all its things, but it can't unload itself now that it's done. And so Titan bar, when it loads, will try to unload the reloader and the unloader if they are loaded. And so if we load the reloader, we're going to see Titan bar comes up, and it's going to turn off both the reloader and the unloader. There we go. Oh, we got another question. I covered it. Okay. Do you look for chat information when you track currencies? Are there ways to access currency information? That's an excellent question. What's that? Yeah, that's an excellent question. I actually am not responsible for the Titan bar plugin, but my understanding is there is some sort of an interface with the wallet. There's a way to look for that, that on startup, Titan bar can go into the wallet, find out how many you have, and then keep track of when you gain or lose them later on. Excellent. Telerian is reporting two cool things. Yes, Telerian is pointing out that in the deed tracker, it assumes that the case of your account in the LOTRO companion and in the LOTRO plugin data directories will match, and it doesn't, and that is a problem. The next release will include a fix for that, where it will check those case insensitively, where it won't matter if there's a capital B or a lowercase b. But yes, thank you. And Telerian points out currency is accessible from the API. In fact, you know what? let's check that out. That's probably under turbine.gameplay. And we can see the wallet here. We can see that there's an event that's fired whenever stuff is added to or removed from the wallet. So you'd get to bypass the chat log then and just get directly informed by the game when something is added or removed. This is exactly the kind of, like, if I could, say a prayer and influence anyone at Standing Stone, which I can't, this is exactly the kind of thing that I would love to see for things like deeds and quests, where the game just says, this thing just happened. You just got a quest, you just finished a quest, you just started a deed, you just advanced on a deed, you just finished a deed. Like, those events would be lovely. And I'm not complaining at all. Like, the fact that I was able to make the deed tracker just on chat logs is pretty cool. Like, there's a lot of things you can do, even if the interface that you want on the LOTRO side isn't available. But that would certainly be a nice addition, should anyone be listening. Oh, thank you, Tellurian. I too, it's funny that you bring that up, and I want to mention that if you are thinking about developing either a LOTRO plugin or something else, you will want to resist the urge to have everything perfect before you ship it out the door. For instance, the deed tracker, there are many things that are not perfect in there that either could be done better or I would do differently now if I could start over again. But at a certain point, I really like that expression, perfect is the enemy of good. At a certain point, if you strive for perfection, you're just never going to get the thing released to other people and they won't be able to enjoy even the flawed version of what you're trying to make. So resist that urge for most things to be perfect. If you're writing software for the space shuttle, please make it perfect. But if you're making a LOTRO plugin, just ship the thing and make it better on the next version. Yes, sleep is good too. Okay, so all of that roundabout talking has gotten us kind of up towards the end of my nominal stream. But let me tell you what it is that I saw, and maybe next time we'll talk about what it is that I wanted to make happen. So, currency tracking. One of the cool things about the Titan bar, and possibly the wallet plugin too, I haven't played around with that one, is being able to see right up here how much you have of something. So for instance, if I wanted to see the Fall Festival token on the Titan bar, I can click save. Oh no, there was an error there. Okay, well let's see what it was supposed to be. Mythor coin show on Titan bar. Sweet, we get a Mythor coin over here. We can see how many I have one. That's great. Let's go. Well, we already have money. How about marks? Let's go ahead and show those on the Titan bar. I do have stuff on the screen. Thank you. Why is that document? Why do we even have that button? Okay, so we can see over here we've got the one Mythor coin that I've got there. We've got marks over here. We can even have medallions on Titan bar. So that's something you can do. You can also, if you don't want to take up all this space, you can go ahead and instead have it be in a tooltip. So these marks and medallions are just on a tooltip when you hover over the currency symbol there. That's awesome. I really like when we're doing a festival, I like putting that festival's token on the bar. It's just, I can glance at it and say, oh yeah, I have that many. I should probably do something before I hit cap. But something I noticed during this festival is that the Midsummer token wasn't behaving properly. Instead, when I tried to put up here, I got an error message. Well, I said, it's giving me a file name and it's giving me a line number. What can we do about that? And so I think we'll leave that here. And next time, we'll go ahead and talk about what it was like to go in and find the couple of things that were off so that the Midsummer token could show up. And then we'll probably talk about creating an actually useful plugin as opposed to just a Hello World little toy plugin. So let me just check chat here while we're wrapping up. Let's see. You want to sleep, but you're stuck watching the stream. Yeah, this is going to be available later, but I do appreciate you being here and interacting with us. All right, Tellurian, I have a plugin doing tracking of character data. Well, you dare not release anything. I appreciate that. Sometimes I start a plugin and I say, "Oh, that might be interesting," and it's just not. Either it's not feasible, or it just doesn't work. And sometimes things just are an interesting thought experiment, and then you put them aside. Let's see. Ancient Ithel coins in Titan Bar. Is that a currency from Blood of Azog? If so, the recent maintainer who took over Titan Bar put together an amazing tutorial on how to add new currencies to Titan Bar. Now, we could go off into a side conversation about how it is perhaps more complicated than it needs to be, but the reality is it is complicated to add a new currency, and they did a great job tracking down all the little things you need to do in order to add a currency into Titan Bar and have it integrate into this system. So, oh, they come from the Throne of Dread Terror. Okay, neat. Yeah, if they show up in the wallet, then they would be trackable by Titan Bar using the same system. You wouldn't have to write anything custom. And then integrating just another currency into this list is much easier now that the current maintainer, and I want to give credit where credit's due. Let me pull that up. I'm just pulling up the LOTRO plugin compendium. Duriel did an amazing job putting together a how do you add a new currency list of steps when he took over maintenance of Titan Bar. So Duriel, wherever you are, thank you so much. That was awesome. It was really very helpful when I was trying to track down these little bits for the Midsummer token and why it wasn't working, is to just see what needed to be there and what was different about this. So that was awesome. Okay, For Andreas asks, what editor am I using? Well, you can see over here, this is an editor called Sublime Text. It is one of many text editors that is way above something like Notepad. It will offer syntax highlighting for languages that it recognizes. I especially like Sublime's text's ability to do multi-editing. So for instance, say I wanted to change all of the R size. Well, I've just closed it instead of doing the thing I was trying to do. That's embarrassing. That's not going to make OBS happy at all. I'm glad, as far as I can tell, OBS hasn't crashed. Excellent. Let me pull that back up. All right, so documents, Lord of the Rings Online, plugins, plugging along, and main. Awesome. Hey, it's back. Oh, that's funny. It went to the other window. Well, that's okay. No? All right. Well, that's just weird. Give me just a moment. I will fix that. All right, so new lesson. Don't close your windows or OBS will just not be happy. Awesome. Okay, so this is Sublime Text. And, oh, I was going on about multi-editing. So this is just a thing of mine. Let's say I wanted to change everything that says R size label. If you hit the right keystroke, it will go ahead and select everything, and you can do live typing while you're doing it. This isn't just a replace all, R really cool size label. And you can see that happening all across the file. I find that really useful for all sorts of things that you wouldn't think that would be applicable for. Oh, Sublime Text is awesome, says Chrome. I agree. I think it's great. If you're doing high-end programming like C++ or C#, things like Visual Studio are really useful, but this is a nice middle ground between Notepad, which is just, and something that takes a lot of resources and is really just a full-fledged development environment. Okay. Oh, and yes, it has a lovely dark mode, which I like a lot. Okay. I think I'm caught up with chat. Thank you all so much for joining me in this exploration of LOTRO plugins. I know it's not the usual fare for the LOTRO Twitch channel. It might not be the usual fare at all for Twitch. I'm not sure, but I'm really excited that some of you like plugins as much as I do and want to come talk about them and maybe learn how to make them. So that's it for today's topics. Just a recap, we've covered where to find the documentation for both Lua and the plugin API, Application Programming Interface, what Lua errors look like, syntax, runtime, or logic errors, the basics about the user interface, so the LOTRO window, the LOTRO button labels, and how to handle events, how to deal with a user interacting with your plugin. So next time, we're going to look at some other UI controls. We're going to put them together into a more functional plugin, and we're going to answer more questions when people derail me, because this stuff is fascinating to talk about. So thank you all so much. That's it from me for now. Just keep plugging along.